Missing airliner. Yet another search for a lost Asian passenger jet. Vatican visit. John Paul II's would-be assassin pays respects to the man he tried to kill. Final farewells. New York honors one of its two fallen officers. And blast from the past. Why player pianos are being featured in concert halls again. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 29th, 2014. Good evening, a blessed Christmas season, and thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Rescue crews are expanding their search tonight for a missing Air Asia jetliner. At least a dozen ships and aircraft will soon be combing 4 more areas near Indonesia. Wyatt Goolsby is joining us tonight covering the growing search operation.
Brian, so far the search efforts haven't found anything definitive. Some rescue crews report suspicious objects in the water hundreds of miles from where the plane vanished, but there are still more questions than answers. The plane disappeared while traveling from Surabaya, Indonesia to Singapore Sunday with 162 people. With no word, family members of the passengers are left waiting. Friends and relatives of passengers on board the Air Asia flight have been anxiously awaiting any word about their loved ones. But the country's top rescue official says the missing jet is likely at the bottom of the Java Sea. That's based on radar data from the plane's last contact.
I was on my way to the airport. I listened to the radio, local radio, and they said that his plane was missing. It was to be his last vacation with his family.
Officials say Flight 8501 lost contact with the ground Sunday after one of its pilots requested to fly at a higher altitude. The plane was flying at around 32,000 feet when it vanished. Investigators are looking if the area's weather contributed to the plane's disappearance. Storm clouds have made it difficult for search crews by air the last 2 days. Air Asia Group CEO Tony Fernandez says their company will wait for a full investigation before considering any policy changes.
We are confident in our ability to fly people, and we'll continue to be strong and continue carrying people who never before could fly before.
Oliver McGee, an aerospace engineer and aviation analyst, says the key to figuring out what exactly happened will be finding the black box, which records all the flight information. But he says if the plane crashed thousands of feet into the ocean, it could take a long time before rescue crews have any chance of finding it.
Any types of depths is a deep sea depth inside Java Sea, the Indian Ocean, or the Atlantic. Very difficult to find just a small box that is basically pinging for 30 days, and after that it's a very difficult search. It's lost.
The sun is coming up in and around the Java Sea, and the search is resuming. Indonesian authorities have been joined by Malaysian crews. Singapore, Australia, China, and India are also assisting. We've also learned this afternoon the State Department here in the U.S. has been asked to help in the search. On Sunday, Pope Francis also asked for prayers for people on board the missing plane. Brian?
And Wyatt, the Pope's also asking for prayers for victims of a ferry fire. The Greek and Italian Coast Guard rescued hundreds of people from that ferry that caught fire. At least 10 people are confirmed dead. The Norman Atlantic burst into flames early Sunday morning in the Adriatic Sea. More than 430 people were rescued. That's based on figures from Italian crews conducting the operations. One passenger claims there were only 3 lifeboats on board. A thorough investigation is underway. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Scotland is reporting its first case of Ebola. Health officials say it's a healthcare worker returning from Sierra Leone. The patient was admitted to the hospital Monday morning. Authorities say there's an extremely low risk to the public in Scotland. About 7,500 people have died in the Ebola outbreak, mainly in West Africa. Hundreds of new officers joined the New York City police force at a very divisive time. Mayor Bill de Blasio congratulated the officers as they graduated today. Applause at the ceremony was mixed with a few boos, catcalls, and even heckling. Some believe de Blasio has created an anti-police climate in New York City. They cite his statements following a grand jury's decision not to indict an officer for the death of a man held in a chokehold. The tension came to a head following the recent murders of 2 New York City police officers. One of those officers, Rafael Ramos, was laid to rest on Saturday. He and his partner, Officer Wenjun Liu, was shot in broad daylight while sitting in their patrol car December 20th. The city's police commissioner honored Ramos at the weekend service.
He was the embodiment of our motto, Fidelis ad mortem, faithful unto death. He represented the blue thread that holds our city together when disorder might pull it apart.
Officer Liu's funeral will be next Sunday in Brooklyn. The shooting suspect, Ishmael Brinsley, took his own life right after those murders. Former President George H.W. Bush remains hospitalized tonight. A family spokesman says the former president's breathing has returned to normal, but he will stay at Houston Methodist Hospital until the all-clear is given by his doctors. President Bush was hospitalized for shortness of breath just before Christmas. At 90, he is the oldest living former president. Well, exactly 31 years after a meeting that defended or defined forgiveness, John Paul II's attempted assassin returns to the Vatican to honor the saint. Susanne LaFrankie has that moving story tonight.
Bearing flowers, the Turkish gunman who shot John Paul II in 1981 returned to the Vatican for the first time. Italian TV captured him laying white flowers on the saint's tomb in St. Peter's Basilica Saturday. Mehmet Ali Agca said he was happy to be at the Christian site.
Oggi sono venuto perché il 27 dicembre è il mio.
On May 13, 1981, St. Peter's Square and the rest of the world were shocked when the Holy Father was shot in a failed assassination attempt. In the following years, John Paul II visited his attacker at his prison cell and intervened to secure his release from prison in 2000. Signs of goodwill that preceded Agca's gesture of respect 3 decades later. Forgiveness was a reoccurring theme throughout John Paul's papacy. Just 4 days after he was shot, he said, "I pray for the brother who shot me, and whom I have sincerely pardoned."
It's about the power of forgiveness, that you stop the cycle of hatred and violence through forgiveness. And I think that's true, certainly in a dramatic case of an assassination attempt, it's very true. But I think as Catholics and as all Christians, in our personal lives, that's true as well.
The motives behind Agca's attack remain uncertain. He initially told police he was acting alone, but Agca also later claimed it was all part of a Soviet plot against the strongly anti-communist Pope's support for the Solidarity movement in his native Poland. Officials say Agca was within his rights to be inside the Vatican this weekend. Still, the Vatican declined his request to meet with Pope Francis. Regardless, Kelly says it's a testimony of forgiveness coming full circle.
Here you see a man who is transformed, a man who was a professional assassin. He experienced forgiveness from the man who he tried to assassinate.
Susanne LaFrankie, EWTN News Nightly.
What a powerful example of the power of forgiveness. Well, the Pope's Angelus address for Sunday's Feast of the Holy Family dwelled on the unique warmth families can share with others. Francis put aside his scripted remarks, as he often does, asking everyone to pray in silence for families who lack understanding and unity. The Holy Father also stressed the importance of grandparents and strong relationships between the young and the old. He says Jesus is the source of love that helps families overcome mistrust and isolation. Large Catholic families are often a stereotype in the U.S. and a rarity in Europe. Pope Francis says they have a special place in his heart and in society. Speaking to the Italian Association of Large Families this weekend, the Pope called them role models of sharing and generosity. He urged politicians to provide more support to big families, and he prayed for those hit by economic crisis. There appears to be no serious damage after a strong earthquake rocked the southern and central Philippines today. The U.S. Geological Survey says it was a 6.1 magnitude quake centered deep in the ocean, far from urban areas. The chain of islands forming the Philippines is located in the Pacific Ring of Fire, where volcanic activity and earthquakes are quite common. Pope Francis, of course, is scheduled to visit the Philippines in the middle of next month. Coming up, an inside look at Austen Ivereigh's biography of Pope Francis, the Great Reformer, and new appreciation for the classic player piano. Christmas blessings. Thanks for joining us on this 5th day in the Octave of Christmas, Monday, the 29th of December. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, with so much good food around for the holidays, Catherine Elliott looks at ways to enjoy without adding extra pounds.
holiday time means fun and food.
Where's the olive oil?
So this year, throw a holiday party with a ton of flavor and not all of the fat. South Africa restaurateur Justin Anthony has tips on how to make healthier dishes.
You know, it's not that difficult. There's a lot of things that people can do that they don't realize. Instead of cooking in butter, they can cook in olive oil.
Take this button mushroom dish.
Grill the mushrooms up with some olive oil, some lemon, and some garlic. You know, there we go. Easy, simple, tasty, and people wouldn't know the difference.
Justin often turns to spices to keep dishes healthy. Instead of using butter and salt on his rice, he throws in a little turmeric. Also, if you're using a store-bought sauce, look at what's in it.
What are those ingredients on the back? How high is the sodium?
And why not spice up the chicken, our old standby? Justin suggests trying curry and a few other healthy ingredients.
It's got bananas in it. It's got this apricot chutney, which is very healthy. We use the breast of the chicken, so it's lean.
All good suggestions for a healthy, fun holiday. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Catherine, for making me hungry. New Vatican figures show nearly 6 million people participated in audiences with Pope Francis in this year of 2014. 1.2 million people attended the Holy Father's 43 General Wednesday audiences. Nearly 1.7 million attended special audiences and liturgies. The crowds, of course, were the largest on the weekends, according to the New Vatican numbers. 3 million people were blessed to hear one of the Pope's 2014 Sunday Angelus addresses. Pope Francis says he is praying for the Taizé community. Their conference begins today in Prague. It runs through January 2nd. Francis calls members of the ecumenical group travelers of the faith who will spread the gospel in their own countries. And the Pope's official Twitter account was spreading a similar message on Sunday, saying the Christian family is missionary. It announces the love of God to the world. We're joined by Austen Ivereigh, author of The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. Austen, when people see this title, Reformer, Radical, they're going to think, yeah, we're going to have women priests. So what is this guy, what is he reforming, and why is he so radical? And how is he misinterpreted?
It's a provocative title for that reason, because what I want to do with this story is explain that he is a reformer and he is a radical, but in the sense of the church tradition of reform, which is restoring the church to its dependence on Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, the essence, to reduce its dependence on, power, wealth, prestige, and other things. So he's a radical in the tradition of St. Francis of Assisi, of Pope Leo the Great. And he's a radical because he's going back to the root. That's what radical means, go back to the roots. What is he changing? He's showing the world the other side, if you like, of the church, which people outside the church often don't see, which is the loving, merciful, compassionate side. He's not challenging in any way church teaching. He's filling out church teaching. He's showing the fullness of it.
And there have been reformers all throughout the church history, and often when they're in the middle of it, there's a lot of controversy, but looking back is when we see those changes. Jesus himself was a reformer.
Exactly right. And actually, you've got to be, at certain points in history, willing to live in the tension. It's a bit what we're doing with the synod at the moment.
Right.
Love, mercy, truth. We have to somehow work out some of the answers which we don't have. And we can only do that if we're willing actually just to sit in it and invite, if you like, God into it and the Holy Spirit into it. He understands this better than anybody. When I studied his life, the thing that kept coming across is he has this capacity to live in tension. He's done it his whole life. And he believes that if you do that, if we do that personally and as a church, things will happen. We give a chance for the Holy Spirit to act. Some people, of course, don't like it and they get nervous, and that's understandable.
Well, and there are people that just don't know what to do about this Pope, and that's probably part of his enigma. Now, he's a Jesuit. He's from Argentina. You spent some time in Argentina, so you know a little bit about where he comes from.
20 years ago, I did a doctorate at Oxford University on the church in Argentina, so I'm living proof that sometimes PhD theses can really turn out to be useful. I went back there last year for about 5 weeks. I traveled around to everywhere he had been. I interviewed about 80 people. About half of them, 25, 30 of them were Jesuits. Very complex story. His first 30 years as a Jesuit, a very turbulent time in Argentine history. There was a lot of unraveling of things that I had to do there. I think what I've given is an account of him as a Jesuit, which is the fullest at the moment that there is out there. And what went wrong? What was the tension between him and the Jesuits? You know, famously, he ended up being sent into a kind of internal exile. And I tell the story there for the first time. Very fascinating story and very hard. I've had to piece it together from lots of different accounts. The Jesuits were beginning to open up when I was there, having initially just said, look, we don't want to talk about it. With me, they were willing to begin to talk about it. And it really is a very, very interesting story, which I think sheds a lot of light on him.
Of course, since he became a bishop, an archbishop, he's no longer technically part of the Jesuit congregation. He still puts S.J. behind his name, doesn't he?
He does, and he is a Jesuit in his spirituality, in the way he thinks, in the way he acts. And you know, the great reform, in a way, that he's doing for the church is really based on the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, the famous month-long retreat, which starts with the first week when you experience the love and the mercy of God, and the second week you choose Christ and you accept the truth, if you like, of the church's doctrines. You've got to have the first before you can have the second. So his whole thing is, how do we have a better first week experience in order to bring people better to that second week? I think that informs actually the whole focus at the moment of his papacy.
This is a fascinating man, and this is a fascinating read. It's called The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. I'm reading it. I wonder if the Pope is. Didn't you give him a copy?
About 10 days ago, I did. I gave him a copy after a beautiful experience of attending the Santa Marta Mass at 7 o'clock in the morning, which he says, I went with my wife. I presented him with this US edition and also the Italian edition. And he seemed a bit startled, I'll tell you the truth. He looked at it and he smiled. And, well, it's not surprising. You know, there's a great picture of him staring out. He then quite quickly passed the books over to his secretary and then looked at me and my wife and talked to us. I could tell he was more interested in us than the book. But here's the thing that really kept me awake the previous night. You've written a biography about the Pope and you're going to present it to the Pope. What do you write as a dedication? You want to know what I put?
I'd love to know what you put.
I said, Holy Father, I know you hate the idea of books which make you the center of attention. I know you want to deflect attention to where it belongs. I hope this book does that.
Wonderful. The Great Reformer, Francis and the Making of a Radical Pope. Austen Ivereigh, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, in these final days of the year, financial planning advice to make the most of your blessings.
EWTN viewers, I want to say a special Merry Christmas greeting to you. Even though I'm Protestant, I join those of you who are Catholic viewers in celebrating this great time of the year when we're reminded that Jesus was not just a man who died for our sins, but a baby born in a manger these 2,000 years ago. He truly was Emmanuel, God with us. And I hope he is that for you this Christmas season.
And it is indeed a season, and we wish you a blessed Christmas. Thanks for joining us on this Monday, the 29th of December. I'm Brian Patrick. As his father's health continues improving in a Texas hospital, Jeb Bush is making big political news tonight. A recent poll conducted by CNN and the ORC has Jeb Bush with a sizable lead over other 2016 GOP presidential hopefuls. None have declared yet, by the way. Bush, a former Florida governor who recently said he's exploring the prospect of a campaign, has 23% support in the polls, followed by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, 13%. Retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson has 9%. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul and former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee trail with 6% each. A crowded field already. Young Americans seem to be more serious about helping others and paying it forward. A new poll conducted by the Associated Press and GfK shows that people under the age of 30 are more likely to say that citizens have, quote, a very important obligation to volunteer. In fact, they are 10% more likely to volunteer than people were 30 years ago. However, that same group's commitment to other civic duties like staying informed, serving on a jury, or voting has dropped dramatically. Some experts find the trend troubling, saying it points to the need for more civics lessons in school. Stanford University researchers are restoring player pianos. They're hoping to unlock the musical genius of some of the great composers. Catherine Zeltner reports.
Imagine if you could hear George Gershwin perform on a real piano. Watch and listen to how the iconic composer played each note. That's the magic of the player piano, which brought recorded music into people's living rooms long before there were records, CDs, or iPods.
This technology of the reproducing piano was really astonishing to people at the time because they could hear major pianists playing music exactly the way they played in performance.
Stanford University researchers want to unlock the secrets of the player piano, the high-tech music machine of the early 20th century. Stanford has launched an ambitious effort to restore and study self-playing pianos and the paper rolls that recorded major composers performing their own work.
In some cases, we have no other recordings of these great artists, so they are, in that sense, an incredibly rare and very valuable window into the past.
So Stanford recently acquired a private collection of 10 player pianos and more than 7,500 rolls. They include recordings by Scott Joplin, Claude Debussy, and George Gershwin. Music professors say the self-playing pianos allow their students to learn from the masters.
Our students are hearing a kind of richness, flexibility, and freedom. They're astonished at the things that they hear in these rolls, right? Because they're so unexpected, and they think, and this was the composer doing this?
Next year, Stanford plans to hold a campus concert featuring a restored player piano, accompanied by a live symphony orchestra. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
How fascinating. David Ballard, president of Champion Financial in Annapolis, Maryland, has some year-end financial tips for us. Dave, we're really grateful to have you here. I know there's some few days left in this year to make a few decisions that could affect our 2014 tax liability. As Christians, generosity is key. What practical insight can you give us about charitable donations?
Well, I think giving now is one of the most important things. I think many people don't understand the role of corporate sponsorship in charity, and that corporate giving is actually still well below pre-recessional levels of 2007. So the church and other charities are still really looking to individuals to help bridge that gap between what was and unfortunately what is now. Quantitatively, the rules are the same. What you give is deductible on your 2014 tax return. And qualitatively, it's always great to see the gratitude and appreciation that comes with a sizable gift.
And certainly giving is not to get the tax deduction for us, but it's nice to know that you can give to a cause that you believe in, like EWTN, for instance,
absolutely,
rather than sending the money to Uncle Sam. So let's talk about the 401k limits. They're increasing for 2015, right?
They are. They're moving up from $17,500 to $18,000. And there's a lot of rules of thumb in finance in general, but they're unequivocally, it's a fact that 401ks are the best way to save for retirement. Making contributions reduces your taxable income right away, and the account grows tax deferred. So that should grow exponentially over time when compared to a taxable account.
So let's look at FSA, the flexible spending account. Very popular. Not everyone takes advantage of it. What's your take?
Yeah, well, for most of us, I think we all realize now that the cost of health care is going up and the coverage is most likely dropping for many individuals as well. So a flexible savings account is one that is sponsored by your employer, much like your 401k, and it's funded through payroll deductions. It also reduces your taxable income, just like a 401k would. The amount can be funded up to $2,500. And it's used to kind of supplement your health care in the fact that it covers out-of-pocket expenses such as co-pays, deductibles, dental work, hearing aids, eyeglasses, things of that nature.
Even reading glasses, that
yes.
was on the list. I was very surprised by that. And it actually will increase your take-home pay if you up that amount, right?
Absolutely it will, in that it reduces your taxable, the amount of tax that you're going to pay during the year.
Very interesting. And one final tip about your January mortgage payment.
Yeah, most people forget that when they make their December payment, the next statement from their bank usually is posted right after that fact, and they can go ahead and make their January payment now and get that interest deduction on their 2014 tax return, which will be reported on their 1098 from their bank.
Dave Ballard, president of Champion Financial. Thanks for the insight and the tips. And
thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on YouTube. We leave you with some beautiful images from the Christmas Eve Mass at the Vatican. Good night and blessed Christmas.